Hey everyone, it's Adios Amigo, and I'm finally bringing you the review of the AKG K92. I apologize for the delay, but I've been kind of busy at work, and so this has taken me a bit longer than I was hoping for. Regardless, we're here finally, and welcome back. So this is part of the under $50 series. I know there's kind of a hate relationship for the AKG K92, and I won't say that I don't understand it. I do. But I think it's a little unfair. And so I'm just going to start off and say I do believe that for the price, there are better options out there, just flat across the board, almost regardless of your taste in tonal balance or the type of music you listen to. But it's not a foregone conclusion. And I'll get into why. But essentially, these are a $50 closed back AKG headphone. They look the part, they feel the part, they're actually half comfortable. The pads in here aren't the comfiest, but you can tell it's an AKG just by looking at it, you know. So anyway, let's go back to the start of all of this, which is there are generally a few things that I think are fairly important. The obvious one is tonal balance, so of course that will be covered. But there's also things like, what do you intend to use it for? What kind of modability are you looking for? What kind of form factor does it have? And all of these different considerations are going to bleed together into, you know, not necessarily my recommendation for any given person, but things for you to consider when you're looking at headphones. So the AKG K92, it is a closed back, fixed cable. They call it a studio monitor, but I wouldn't use it for that purpose. The sound on this is fairly unlike AKG house sound, which I tend to actually like. The AKG house sound normally has a fairly mid-forward, spacious, airy presentation. Vocalists sound pretty incredible, especially female vocals have this kind of ethereal quality to them, and they have a lot of energy in the mids without being too hot in the treble, though sometimes there is an upper mid bump that can be a bit much even for me. And on the flip side of that, typically, but not always, they have a mid bass bump, but the sub bass doesn't normally extend all that far down. Now, these particular AKGs have some of that. They do have a large sounding stage. But, and this is a big but, they're missing almost all of that mid quality that I love about AKGs. The mids, if anything, sound more recessed than any part of it. It's almost a V curve, but because the bass and the treble are also subdued, well, the bass is a little bit boomy, but still, it's hard to tell even if it's just... When I first put these on, I thought everything sounded compressed, and the bass was overbearing. And that held true generally through my listening experience. I do think that over time, with a little bit of burn-in, the treble presented itself a little bit more energetically, but it was just a minor improvement, and the mids still sounded really recessed. So in the end, I have to say, if I was listening to music personally, this would not be my cup of tea. Going on to the qualities of it, sometimes you can get that airiness after the treble kind of picks up again after burn-in. They almost sound like there's a slight veil to the mids, and you can't tell if it's a veil or just recessed. And there's a kind of haziness in there, which I'm not a fan of, because I like to live in the mids a lot of time. So, you know, I wasn't super excited about it. Again, there's a mid-bass impact, like typical AKG house sound. Not much extension to the sub bass. But because the sub bass doesn't extend and because it doesn't roll off well from the mid bass to the sub bass, you can hear some distortion pretty easily in the sub bass, depending on the types of tracks you listen to. The upper mid bump from the AKG house, not here, like I've said. The imaging precision horizontally isn't as precise as I'd expect from an AKG. However, it is still decent in that regard, and I think it actually beats the K700 series for vertical imaging. They have a funny tendency to put vocals just above the horizon, and so when you're gaming, for instance, you will often believe that people who are right in front of you are actually above you based on the sound they give off. And this doesn't have that problem. And so in that regard, it might actually be a better gaming option than the K700 series. But in terms of music, it's nowhere close to the 700 series, in my opinion, in terms of sound quality. It doesn't have the detail retrieval that you might get in other AKG models. Even other budget ones like the K275, which I happen to love. These lack that. And they also don't have that sort of airiness. I mean, they have a little bit of it, just a tiny bit, but you can really just get that sort of breathiness from female vocals and other AKG house sound models. And because that formula has been changed here, you don't really experience... You get a little taste, a little sampler plate. You don't get the full thing, though, for these particular AKG headphones. And that kind of bums me out, if I'm being honest. Actually, this goes back way back, but the first pair of hi-fi headphones that I ever purchased with my own money was a K712 Pro with a shit value 1 for an amplifier. And I loved that combination to no end. And granted, the value 1 was not the best tube hybrid amp, but it was sufficient at the time. I thought it sounded good. And on even better tube amps, I just love the AKG sound generally. Unfortunately, the tube amps really didn't do much to improve this AKG, the K92. I did try, though. The separation and layering are actually pretty typical for AKG. It does a half-decent job at that. You don't have a lot of congestion coming in from these. It doesn't sound like there's too many instruments on the stage and the stage is too small. Everything sounds like it's where it should be, and it sounds more natural. It doesn't sound like you're putting more sound in less space, which is good. Especially on synth bass lines, I've noticed, like in Taylor Swift's albums, like Lover. She really likes her synth bass on Lover. It's a bit much for these headphones to reproduce, and in that struggle, they make some really ugly sounds, which I'm not stoked on. It doesn't always come up, but when it does, it fails spectacularly. One surprising thing, and this is, I think, because of the treble kind of gaining some energy back after like an hour of burn-in almost. Acoustic strings actually sound okay on these. So if you listen to like quartets, that kind of music, that might be okay on these. That might be one of the few exceptions where these actually do okay. Let's see, where was I? These are warmer than the AKG 275. The 275 is another closed back. It folds up. They call it a studio monitor. I think the mids are a little too forward for that, but I think it's more in the line of what I would expect from a studio monitor than these. The 275s have more of that upper mid and treble energy, so those are a little bit brighter. this is a lot more laid back and relaxed, and so you don't have those problems. The stage has decent depth, and I think the real reason that the mid seems so recessed is that you sound further from the stage than you typically would from an AKG. A lot of times, what'll happen for the tuning of these headphones is the bass and the treble will sound like they're right up in your ear, and then the mid sound far away, and then that's how you know it's recessed. On these, and like I was saying, it sounded like the sound was compressed when I first started them up. I think because you're just further away from the stage in general, it doesn't seem like the difference is as big. And so what I did to kind of play with these and figure out where the sound was for me, I actually have a Lokius, and I was, adjusting all the different equalizing bands, trying to figure out what sounded missing. And so that's how I sort of fine-tuned what I thought was out of action for me on these. And, it sort of worked. The Lokius didn't solve the problem, it just helped identify what the problem was for me. And so I think that about covers the sound, really. I don't want to beat it to death too badly. In terms of the other things about this headphone, though. So before I move on, I'll just say, with the sound quality and the aspects of the headphone that you get out of these, I think really their best suitability is for a $50 gaming headset. I don't think it's better than the JVC in that regard. But if you do end up with these, I think they could serve that purpose. It's kind of like, how do you cope with buying them, knowing that there's something else that I would rather have, that I think most people would rather have? Well, they're actually a half-decent, gaming headset. I think they're still a step up in that regard compared to a lot of gaming headsets that you'll find on the market. And so in that category, they're actually okay. I don't think I would consider them just a flat loss. I think you can still get your value out of them in that regard. But going on to the other qualities, comfort. These are actually really comfortable. These are actually pretty lightweight, despite having at least not cheap plastic. It doesn't feel flimsy, it doesn't rattle. The suspension system on this is actually really comfortable, and it works pretty well. This is one of the more comfortable headphones I've worn. It does have that typical problem where there's not a lot of adjustment forward and backward on the cups, and so you have that sort of V shape. And you will get some pressure on the bottom of your ear, but it's not quite as bad as the cost for me. I found these when the foam kind of warmed up and the pads warmed up, I found it was actually still pretty comfortable. It wasn't too bad, and I could wear these for extended listening. The cable, as you can see here, it's nothing fancy. It looks almost like it should be removable. There's a little kind of insert area there, and they probably could have made these removable cables if they really wanted to. They didn't. And the cable itself is actually quite long, which is pretty typical, I think, for headphones designed for studio usage. But they also work well for consoles too. If you have to sit further away from the TV, it's good for that. And so, in the intended use that I envision for these, it's not that big of a deal. However, if you want to wear them because they are lightweight and they are relatively efficient, if you want to wear them out and about, the cable doesn't jank that badly, so you might be able to coil them, but you would essentially just have a coiled up cable in a pocket or something jangling about, which really isn't great, if I'm being honest. It's doable. It's not great, though, and so I really wouldn't envision it for that usage. Now, as for the isolating qualities, if you wanted to take these out to a library, or if you wanted to listen to something while someone is nearby, you don't want to bother a neighbor, a roommate, a spouse, a partner, These, let's take a look at the chart here, are about, they isolate just, whoop, there that goes. They isolate about the same amount as the JVC HARX 700, which basically means from 10 feet away in another room, I can hear them pretty clearly. With while it's on a phone block, music's playing through a mobile device. 20 feet away, I can sort of hear it, but I can't hear it from any further than that. 20 feet straight shot down a quiet house. I can sort of hear it, which is actually surprisingly decent, I found, when comparing a lot of closed back headphones. It's actually not a terrible result in the end. So if you want something closed back and you want to be able to isolate with it, these actually aren't terrible. Again, because the JVC HARX 700 is in the same price category or cheaper, depending on if there's a sale going on. And because I like the tonal balance more. Now, the JVCs are heavier, but I also find that the suspension system is a little bit more comfortable. They sit more comfortably on my head. There's a little bit more range of motion on the cups. I think they're more comfortable, period. But they are heavier, so that might be a drawback for some people. I think the JVCs are just the better all-around buy. Now, if you're looking for something, I guess, a little bit more packable, there are other options. This is slightly smaller than the JVCs. It does pack slightly smaller because it's just a smaller frame. There's less material going on. The cups are smaller. But I still wouldn't go this way. Oh, there's my Seiko going off. I did not expect that. So, yeah, I mean, it's really hard for me to recommend these for any particular use just because there are other things I think that are better. You know, there's nothing it excels at, but there are things that excel better at it than most, for most categories. And I think really the only thing this has going for it is how light it sits on the head. And so if there's someone with like a weak neck or they get a lot of shoulder pains or something like that, and like a medical reason to go lightweight, then perhaps something like this or the cost might make more sense. But excluding that, I would just go with the JVCs. I think it's very hard for me to justify sound-wise anything up but those with some of the caveats I've mentioned. And so the AKGs just kind of get like they're okay, Caesar gives a sideways thumb. But because there are headphones I give a straight thumbs up to, it kind of makes them a loser even though they didn't lose. And that's how I would sadly conclude my thoughts on the AKG K92. They kind of lost without losing. And next is going to be the Koss, GMR 54X ISO, I think. Those are going to have a slightly similar conclusion to them, but also slightly different. Because the AKG is built a little bit better, the sound signatures are different, the comfort's a little bit different, the use case is a little bit different, and so largely they're going to fall under the same category of I still recommend the JVC, but there might be some rare instances where you want them. So that's the end of the K92 review. I'll get into the Koss hopefully next week, but that's really asking a lot from me at this point, so it might be a while. Anyway, I'm making revisions to my listening experience in the meantime. I actually had a full-on receiver here and speaker amp, so I could power these Yamaha C92-2s, which, frankly speaking, the receiver actually broke, and so that kind of, broke my heart But it is what it is. There's still a lot of content coming. I'm working with different things. I've actually gotten Mini DSP to run on a Linux system, which is kind of like a fun thing for me, I think. I've got some vinyl coming in. There's other headphones. There's a whole nother price category, etc., but one bit at a time. The recommendation remains the same. Under $50, try a JVC HARX 700 if the cable length doesn't matter and bulky cans are okay. Alright, I'll see y'all later. Have fun, and thanks for watching.